committee or anything, but if we're looking for minutes later, it's helpful.
See you now, Karen. Oh, and now you're gone.
Okay, so did everybody get the agenda? I can pull it up on the screen if anybody needs it and screen share, although it does make it hard for me to let people in on the waiting room because it obscures that. Steph and Elizabeth had asked me to sort of do a little intro before we get on because it's been a while since we've all met. Just to sort of touch base where we've ended up. We had established our meeting calendar right before everything went into COVID weirdness, and for a while it wasn't clear that Elizabeth and Steph were going to be able to join on Zoom calls. So the two of them and I have had touch-based conference calls since the time we went into various forms of quarantine. But as Paul pointed out at the Trails meeting the other day, it means that the folks who were in this working group have sort of lost track where we were. So we want to just sort of reorganize our thoughts about, you know, what the steps are, where we're headed, what Steph and Elizabeth are doing for us, and, you know, some other stuff. And I think they're going to take most of the agenda, but this is very informal, so anybody pipe in at any time, et cetera, et cetera. Who is 603-657-6205?
Joe I. Martino.
I should
Joe.
recognize that.
Howdy.
All right, I'm going to rename you.
Kira, do you mind if we do just a round of introductions, just for refreshers and so that we can hear each other's voices a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, so you just want to refamiliarize yourself with who's in the group? Is that the...
Yes, just in case.
Okay. All right, well, everybody knows me, Tara Penn, Director of Planning and Development, host of the meeting. Who wants to go next? Well, I'll have to call it out because I'm the only one who can see everyone. Brian, why don't you take it?
All right, Brian Lafredo, Trails, EDC, Branding and Marketing.
Okay. Steph?
Steph Stroud, National Park Service, Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program.
Joe?
Joe I. Martino, Thompson Historical Society.
Charlie?
Charlie Obert. I'm active with the Trails Committee, with EDC and Branding, and with the Historical Society.
Dave and Karen?
David Strosky, Trails Committee.
Karen Durlak, Trails Committee Chair.
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Brown, National Park Service, Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program.
Paul?
Paul Provost, Trails Committee and Historical Society.
And Lyanne?
Lyanne's muted.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute her and it wasn't working, so I was hoping yeah, she's unmuted herself. She's got it.
Hi, I'm Lyanne. I work for the Last Green Valley. I live in Killingly. I don't have too much knowledge of what goes on in Thompson, but we are assessing the trail up there. We did a few weeks ago, and we're going to do another one tomorrow. So that's kind of why I'm a little bit involved.
And the people who aren't here that I know are involved are Tom Chase, also from the Historical Society. He couldn't make it tonight. Leslie Munschauer couldn't make it tonight. I think those are the main people that have been involved in the discussions of it to date. If I missed anybody else, y'all let me know. Steph, you want to take it from there? That was just, again, to refamiliarize ourselves.
Yes, thank you for humoring me. You never know who could be in the background or might be on the phone line too. So I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. And I'll just pull up our agenda here so I don't forget anything. Yeah, so I think I'm just gonna basically have like a conversation tonight about why we brought you all here, and then kind of what we've been talking about as a planning group, Park Service and TIRA basically during these COVID times. And kind of, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts as we're going, or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to chat. So feel free to jump in at any time. But so basically what we've been working on together is taking that kind of initial kickoff meeting that we had back in, I think it was like February or March, where we talked about kind of the vision for Thompson as kind of like Trail Town, incorporating all the many different efforts that TIRA is kind of, and you all are orchestrating right now in terms of beautifying Thompson and pulling out kind of your historic assets and your recreation assets, so signage, wayfinding, placemaking. So basically what Elizabeth and TIRA and I have been doing is trying to like pull all the strings together and weave them into what we're calling like a Trail Town action plan. And now finally, I think we're getting to the point where we kind of know what's the action, where the action's happening, and we can focus on the train wreck site. And I'm hoping what we can do now is kind of take what ideas have been out there and kind of package them into a community workshop. And basically what we hope to do is take what has the work that's been done so far and kind of present them as design, rough kind of a design ideas for the public to see and give us feedback on. So for example, right before this call, I was just kind of looking around and like a quarter of the homes in Thompson have children under 18 living there. So we would want to make sure that we kind of talk with families and younger folks to see what they're excited about and what ideas that they really enjoy and what about the kind of train history strikes them the most. And that could include things like educators too, who are using this as potentially like an outdoor classroom. And then we'll want to think about other populations in town too. So maybe the aging population and how they could access the site and what would be useful for them. We'll want to think about amenities like restrooms, handicap access, safety, those types of things, and how that all plays into the bigger picture, which is essentially making this a really nice, awesome place for people to come learn about the train wreck history and then also use it as a trail as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we've been thinking about, and we're working now with you all through our program until next summer. So we're hoping to do this workshop and then also write the Trail Town action plan and then apply for the NEA grant in a little bit. So, but I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to talk to a little bit more about what those things are. But that's just kind of what our conversation has been so far. And we're just excited to kind of take the things that we've been hearing and seeing and bring that out into the public and see what they say. And then, yeah, we'd love to hear if you have any thoughts or questions about that.
Yeah, Paul's raising his hand.
Yeah, Steph, you said you'll be here till next summer. Do you know about when that will be?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll turn it over to Elizabeth because that is kind of dependent on when we can wrap everything up into a grant that Tira will be applying for.
Yes.
But roughly August.
Yeah. Just before we keep going, do we have anyone taking notes or who would like to volunteer to take notes for us?
Well, I've got the recording running, Elizabeth, so I can create notes and minutes from it later. I'm taking rough notes, but I'm more listening than transcribing.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah, so just like Steph alluded to, we kind of see our work together in this working group as coming, is really being incorporated into 3 big products. And so the first one, like she mentioned, is the community design workshop. Certainly we know that you folks are the experts on this history, on the site, on your town. And so we want to work together with you guys to clarify your ideas, figure out the best way to present them to the public in a way that excites them and makes them want to come visit the Airline State Trail and just, you know, be out and about more in Thompson. So a lot of what we hope to do is get people excited with this workshop and have, you know, feel a lot of sense of pride for being Thompson residents. And so, like I said, so this workshop, just given the times, will obviously be virtual. And we are going to, next time we meet, we will hopefully have a more refined outline of what exactly that looks like. And we think a lot of, you know, tonight's conversations will help shape that as well. So we basically want to present these ideas to the public, gather their feedback, and then from there, we would end up making recommendations. And like Steph spoke to, these would probably live in the Trail Town Action Plan. So it's basically going to be a report that encompasses everything that we have worked on this past year and then up until next summer. So incorporating trail surveys, you know, we have the, you guys have the trail counter along the trail. So seeing the uptick in trail use is going to be incredibly important, and understanding the economic effect of, you know, what this train wreck design could supply the community. And so this design that we come up with, once we gather input from the public, will be incorporated into that. And so that's sort of the second pronged approach, second prong of how our work together will live in a product. And that will probably end up being completed around the time that our assistance is completed. So next summer, kind of August time, so about a year from now. And then the third one being the NEA Our Town grant. After conversations with Tira and just talking about this opportunity and what it fully encompasses, and I'll kind of let Tira explain that a little more when she talks just about kind of the motivation and why we see time for Thompson to apply for the Our Town grant. But you know, we've done the songwriting competition, and there are so many great things happening in Thompson right now in terms of placemaking. And so certainly this train wreck design that we hope to develop and get input on from the community will be incorporated into that. So ultimately, we'll help you guys leverage grant funding and open up a lot of great opportunities for the town. And so Steph mentioned that August date because that is, I don't know the exact, let me check the exact day.
I think, yeah, the August was the deadline for this year. So I think we're guessing it'll be the deadline for next year too.
So yeah, so we assume, you know, once we put on this workshop in the fall, gather input and opinions, that we would be able to refine all of this together in time for an August submission for that grant, which is hopefully successful. But I will turn it over to Tira to just kind of expand upon that further and really explain why we think it's a great time for Thompson to be doing this.
Yeah, which is fine. But before I do that, I want to give the other members of the project group, time to chime in and ask their questions here, because there were questions at the last Trails Committee meeting, about what we're doing, and I don't want to forget anything that was asked or steamroll over anybody else's participation here. But then I'm happy to talk, and what I'd like to do is talk more organizationally about steps and sort of benchmarks for it. But please don't just let me yak on, because I do that meeting after meeting after meeting. So, Paul, I think you had questions at the Trails Committee meeting specifically.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you had some UConn students that were going to design basically the place for the train wreck, and I was wondering how that all worked. We would like to give some input to that, so that they have some guidelines as to what it is that everybody would like to see.
Yeah, so just in relation to the UConn Senior Engineering Program, what they do, and I know that Trails has had some interaction with student teams before around projects. So they offer up student teams to complete a senior project as a graduation requirement, and I have submitted a request for a team to help with the design and drafting of the permanent site of the train wreck park. And Karen had also had a similar question. She was concerned that we would be turning design over to the students. I think it would be more appropriate to think of it as we would be employing them to assist in the drafting of a plan that we would be dictating to them. But as engineering students, it's in their interest to use those skills. I mean, I don't have CAD skills. There may be people on this project group who do. But in other words, they're not dictating anything to us. We are, in fact, doing exactly what you're suggesting, Paul, assuming that they choose the project, which I believe they will. Then they work for us, not the other way around. So the process of what we do between now and when we have a public workshop should include them once they come into school, from as soon as they're able to start working with us, so they can see what our priorities are. And then I would expect that they would do just that, help with the drafting and the drawing. Because they're engineering students, they're going to want to have something that qualifies as quote unquote real engineering. We had the same issue with the pop-up village for this past year's project, that was more like architecture and landscaping than real engineering. So they proposed, for example, a crosswalk and maybe a gateway to Riverside Park. I have suggested that they could look at some traffic calming measures for that crazy bend where it comes around where the parking area is. What would it take to add a crosswalk there, maybe a road diet, something that they could include as an engineering measure. We're under no obligation to use any of it, but we would then have it as a tool for as we further develop. Does that answer your question, Paul? Is that a yes?
Yes.
I couldn't tell.
So basically you
Anybody
submitted a grant to them, and they're gonna, if they accept it, then we'll work with them at that time.
Yeah, they do this every year with all their graduating seniors in the engineering school. They form little teams. They choose projects that are proposed to them, not just by municipalities. The good news about that is they used to charge and it's not a lot of money, but you know, there was $1,000 fee associated up through last year, but they've waived that completely for municipalities. So it's a free of service charge that helps the students, theoretically helps us, and if one of the teams likes our proposal and thinks they'd like to work on it, then you know, we get some mutually beneficial free labor out of it.
Okay.
Kira, was
I'd like to make one point of clarification, Tara. I think that actually we volunteered money to them for the second time that they did a project for us for the Trails Committee. And we just simply thought that it would be appropriate to help defer some of their expenses involved in it. I've been wrong before.
Well, that may be the case with one of the Trails projects, the one that I handled for EDC last year. There was definitely a fee involved.
Yeah,
so I don't, you know. But regardless, it's free for municipalities as of now and presumably going forward. So that's a benefit. Anybody else have any sort of questions about where we've been to this point before we talk about organizing where we're going? No one? Come now. Steph or Elizabeth, do you mind screen sharing the agenda? I would do it from here, but if anybody else dials in, it'll obscure the participant window, so I won't see them.
I think I can share mine. Let's see.
I enabled
You
share
all see
screen.
that?
Yep. All right. So we're talking timelines now, and by all means, anybody jump on top of me as I'm yakking here. So let's sort of jump off that Yukon thing into the idea of this community design workshop, because in some way, I think the appropriate way to think of that is like the semester or leading into the semester project for the kids, because they're going to want to complete something for their first semester and compile their report. If we time this well, I think, again, this serves everybody's purposes. So if we can decide what we would want to bring into a design workshop, how many completed ideas, how many questions that we want to ask, and the kinds of roles that members of the group would take in both the design of the workshop and the development of the material to go into it, I think that would be very helpful. So I'd like to bat that around before we move on to the next bullet.
So we're asking, are there some things we definitely want to have answered? Some questions we want to pose to the community?
And this is really you guys' time to shine, because I do not have an agenda on this one.
This is Joe Martino. I believe that the committee over a period of time has drafted ideas that we would like feedback from the community, showing, and if Charlie's there, Charlie could talk about, there were multiple phases of ideas that could be tackled one at a time, or perhaps we could do 2 or 3 phases all together, depending on how much funding was available and effort in terms of personnel willing to contribute on a volunteer basis. So I would say we can come very well prepared to any meeting to show these ideas. It doesn't mean we're selling this and this is all that we have to offer you. This is an idea in multiple phases. Does this sit well with the audience? So that would be one area to start with.
Okay. What else we got, guys?
I think I would like to try to answer some of Joe's comments. Although I haven't read the note that we put out, it was quite a while ago. We did sort of layer an approach towards this. And in my thinking, as Joe said, we've got a lot of the background stuff. I don't know where it's all filed, but our vision and our hopes for the project, for example, mine includes very strongly that we work out a conservation easement with the Butler family to reactivate that link for a rail trail. Since it was so important to the train wreck itself, it's part of the fabric of the story in the town of Thompson. Somebody else already mentioned the issues about safety for visitors and comfort for visitors. And so I was thinking most of those points would come up when we do sit down with the UConn students. Like Tira, I'm pretty optimistic that they'll like this project and be able to help us to get a more firm vision of it so that we can move it forward. If it will help anybody, I'll dig up the report that Joe and I were working on. Joe, that was last fall. I'm going to have to dig back and figure out exactly what I titled it, because I tend to I defeat myself with a bit of OCD, and if I can't remember the key phrase, I'm stuck.
It's entirely likely that I have that in my e-files at the office as well, Charlie, so I can look for that too.
I thought that you might. That's why I wasn't too concerned about where it was. I figured that it had been looked at, firmed up, and passed along for somebody to be the shepherd of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I see the workshop, because I have an ostensibly orderly mind, jury's actually kind of out on that one, but if any of you attended the one, and I think most of the people here did, attended the wayfinding public workshop that we did with Kelsey and John from what was CME and is now CHA, that as well was broken into a series of discrete parts and issues. So, you know, there are threads here for the development of this site on the airline trail. One of those is a historical thread. One of those is a trails use thread, you know, meaning the maintenance of the trail, the development of the trail as an asset, just as a recreational asset. You know, there's an economic development thread, you know, and then there is sort of the overarching idea of that Trail Town Action Plan, which is building on this one discrete site as a keystone project from which we can expand the idea of Thompson as a place to visit. It is interesting, you know, it's well maintained. So the tying it back to community identity in all of these ways. You know, anybody who knows me knows I like a good synergy, right? Because if you have the threads woven together, it's harder to pull it all apart. So that's sort of the general. I'd like to break the workshop down into these threads that get discussed by members of this project group in the workshop for the public, soliciting ideas that start to crystallize around these, you know, 3 or 4 interrelated ideas. So I guess that's what I'm primarily asking here in terms of an organizational piece. Who wants to do what with that? How do you want to develop it? How do you want to pass it back to us? You know, I sit on lots of these project groups. Some of them are writing projects. Some of them are, you know, based around steps to complete a physical artifact. This one has both. And everybody who works in every project group gets impatient to know what's next. So if we can decide, right, not me assigning or Steph assigning or Elizabeth assigning stuff to people, if we can say, hey, I want to be a part of deciding how this is going to look in this workshop, then that gives us guidance for how we discuss it over the next couple of months. Does that make sense to folks?
Tara, it does to me. This is Joe again. If you're asking for volunteers to come forward and prepare something for a presentation, we certainly can pull together a presentation based on the previous work and probably, you know, put together a 10 or 15-minute presentation of the concepts we have to date.
And when you say we, are you talking Historical Society? Are you talking this project group? I mean, what's the we here?
The we is the victims who worked before on making the original concept. I think we can get them again together to collaborate, to put it together and show it.
I love that.
It's Trails and Historical Society and other contributors who all participated with ideas.
So that is, and I knew you were going to be the one, Joe, just in case anybody was wondering. What about the design aspect? Because at some point, these kids, if they come on, I would certainly, and we're speaking somewhat hypothetically here, right? Because we don't have them yet. But assuming that these kids come on, they're going to have a certain amount of responsibility to design as we're directed. Who wants to be sort of their point person? Who feels strongly about communicating specs and concepts? Because that, again, in the workshop, that's probably going to be a piece that that person or couple of people would be leading on with those kids.
Oh, Tira, I just had a question before, well, in regards to like design, I was wondering about the report that Charlie and Joe put together, and I was wondering if that has been seen by anyone at DEEP yet, and if they gave you feedback about like some of the feasibility of that, because honestly, like we wouldn't know what the kind of restrictions are for the airline, and a DOT is another one, since it does intersect with the road there. And I'm wondering if those folks have seen the report yet and given you any feedback on whether or not some of those proposals are feasible yet, because I'd imagine we'd want to run it past them first before going to the general public.
I agree with that. And I will say, as I understand it, a key element of the design has already been done. Of course, consider it a rough draft, but we had a local surveyor do some work, and he outlined from notes that Tom Chase and Paul and Joe provided, accurate placements of where all the original buildings were and where the train wreck itself was. And that has been forwarded down to DEEP and specifically to Lori Ciannotti and to Janine Davis. And the response, as I recall it, was, hey, that looks great. Nothing was said about stop, don't do it. And so I think that that can be considered a rough draft to hand over to the UConn students. And then some of the ideas that Joe and Paul have shared about possibility of a replica footprint of the original station that could be a pavilion for maybe for picnics or of the like. Those things, you know, we're keeping in mind that we are going to have a fairly limited budget, and a lot of this, even as we build it, is going to be in phases. So that much has been done. Another point, and I want clarification before I volunteer to provide too much more on this, But when are we looking to have this public meeting? Because I've met with a drone pilot, and I think all of you have been apprised of that. We have some rough footage, and we have some ideas, and the concept, part of the concept that I had was, for example, if we were to have footage coming north on the railroad right-of-way that gets to the point of where the train wreck happened, we can plug in the data that comes up when you look at the QR code stuff that Paul and Tom put together. So just kind of edit it in, and there it is. And I believe we could have that put together in a relatively short amount of time, but I have to work with the photographer on that. So before I say we can have that, I want to know what our timeline would be.
All right, this is Paul. I want to get some clarification, I guess. I see this as two separate issues. I believe the UConn engineering students were going to be more interested in designing the structure, not designing the site layout. Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Well, I think that's pretty open-ended, Paul, and we can direct them as a group as we find appropriate. I can tell you one thing I do know from talking to Matt Quinn at Connecticut Deep is that no electricity will be available at this site. That is a restriction.
Okay. So most of the stuff that we have as of today is basically information or work that was done on the site itself. There wasn't, I don't think we have any anything on what the structure will be like, or any input from that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. I assume that what Charlie's talking about with the local surveyors, that he's talking about the drawings that Daniel Blanchette did last year or even late the year before, all of which I have saved as PDFs, and he's done extensive stuff. That's what you were talking about, right, Charlie?
That's correct.
Yeah, so none of those included mock-ups of a reproduction depot or a pavilion or a gazebo or any other thing. It was just locating artifacts that exist or were known to have existed in previous places.
That's also correct. And to the point that I think was alluded to, this is very flexible and fluid at this point. We might be able to incorporate the design of a pavilion in the work that they put together. And if we can provide them with enough solid of a foundation to build on, the drawings that Daniel did, and then they can say, well, okay, let's start with this and then do this and do this and do this. They're half done. And they have the semester to do the whole year, I think. They'll start it
they do.
when the classes resume.
Right.
Yeah,
so what they're going to do,
academic year.
Yeah, assuming that their project schedule unfolds similarly to the pop-up shops, because I think that their first semester product is going to be a written report, and their second semester product is going to be the renderings. That's what we got from the pop-up shop kids. You might get some rendering for the fall semester, but mostly it's going to be reports. So I guess I would even backtrack on myself a little bit and say we can give them design concepts to give rough sketches on perhaps, but it's the surveying of interest of the public that they'd probably be for design ideas. So we should think of them as a design resource, a design and drafting resource, but the ideas are going to have to come from us and come from the community through the workshop.
That's right. And I would say the Park Service, we don't recommend, or we don't create documents for construction. We don't get down to that level of detail. So that is actually what the UConn students could assist with. So we, as our workshop with the public, can come up with the ideas. So say we find out, oh, the public would love to see like 4 kiosks. We know that because of this design workshop we did, and here's where we would like them. Then we can pass that off to the UConn students who can come up with what the kiosk looks like and how to build it. Because that's a level of detail that we don't get into, but I think the UConn students probably would.
Yeah, they can. The limitations on the UConn program are if it is something that requires real engineering, you know, a licensed engineer, you can't just take what they give you. That was, again, the beauty of last year's project. They had some engineering suggestions, but those were ancillary to the main project, which is draw us these little pop-up shops, show us placement, make suggestions about, you know, locating the amenity and increasing walkability. So we didn't need anything from them that required genuine engineering. It just had to be incorporated as an option. Yeah.
This is Karen, and I apologize because I had to be at the selectmen's meeting, so I missed some stuff. But I believe the first project that UConn did for us, which was a bridge design over for the at the dam, that the professor signed off on full engineering drawings.
Oh, that's interesting because that is very different than what was described to me by the program advisor in last year's project.
They may have changed it. There may be a different professor who can't sign off. I don't know. But I know that the stuff that we submitted to Army Corps of Engineers was ready, you know, ready to build.
Interesting. So that might be an open question after all.
That's my recollection also, and I will tie into that by saying that when they designed a bridge to go over Route 193 on the airline trail, they had to use all of the same specifications and codes and standards and anything else that they would have used if they were already graduated and working in an engineering firm. And I even made a point of asking that early on and again later with the expectation that if everything was correct that way, it would be easier for a civil engineer who has the stamp to review their notes and check the site and come up with something a whole lot quicker than it would be if we hired a civil engineer to go out there and do it. I believe
Charlie, you're breaking up. You're going to have to dump your video. You're going to have to go back to your thumbnail.
Okay, I believe that the code and the regulations that an engineer would need to include within their specifications were included within them. And as Karen said, you know, there's a professor over there who maybe he can stamp it and maybe he can't, but he probably knows somebody and he could say, well, my engineering students did this and they all passed. It should grease the skids and get it through quicker. It's optimistic, it's naive, but I think that when they're done with it, it sure looked like a valid project to me. And I certainly hope that we keep all of that stuff in the folder that comes out of the public meetings. The bridge down at 193 and whatever these engineers come up with for the train wreck site.
Yeah, that bridge stuff's all in my office. I mean, I've got their presentation materials. Regardless of whether, go ahead, Karen.
Well, I want to ask about this, the workshop and some of the things that you talked about, the different threads. If we're talking about the economic development thread, it just on this workshop, it seems to me that the same people are the ones involved over and over. And so we get kind of predictable answers like the wayfinding. And I'm wondering if there's a way, because we want this to bring people to Thompson, we're not just doing this for the residents. Is there a way to get this workshop to a wider audience for feedback or a duplicate workshop so that maybe we're going to train buffs, or we're going to maybe the other people on the 12 town task force and see what kind of feedback we get from them? Is this, I don't know if this is possible.
I think that's a great idea, Karen, and I think in some way it must be possible, even if it's only done live once and is distributed as a recording afterwards. I mean, you are starting to talk about time commitments for a lot of people.
Right.
Not that I mind, but you know, it complicates. I certainly think that the larger 12-town task force should be made aware of this and a part of it. You know, I've been trying to communicate with Jeannie Davis at Connecticut RC&D about that brochure project that, you know, I've been talking about.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, they're all still working completely remotely, so I'm just not getting the quick turnaround on communication that I otherwise might. But absolutely, this should be, you know, spread to as many and as wide a group of interested audiences as we can. I guess the question that follows your question is, who are those groups? Who are the contact people? I mean, I can contact Jeannie Davis. I have no strong connections with anybody, for example, who would be a railroad buff, a train buff. I would assume Tom Chase is the guy on that. But again, what's the mechanism by which we reach them? Is it one big, well-publicized live workshop that then gets distributed via recording and transcript? Probably something like that at this moment in time. But, you know, surely open to suggestions.
Can I ask, Lyanne, I was wondering if there was maybe a network connected to the Last Green Valley that might be a good way to get maybe do another version of the workshop for maybe 12 Town Task Force and Last Green Valley folks, or if you had any ideas based on that organization that you work with.
The connection that we have for the railroad is the Connecticut Eastern Railroad Museum in Willimantic. And there are a couple of contacts there. Jeff Lafferty, Lafferty, and Ray Axelrod. Ray does a lot of walks for Walktober. He has his quirks, but he is knowledgeable in some ways.
How about your e-newsletters? You have a pretty robust e-newsletter for TLGV, don't you?
Well, we send a newsletter out to members once a month.
I think that there's probably a lot of crossover interest between your membership and those who would be interested in this larger project, even just as a sort of a one-off dial-in kind of thing.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of second that with that is helpful to have that Last Green Valley audience, because even if the folks that are receiving your newsletter aren't necessarily residents of Thompson, what they are our audience for using the trail,
Right.
being potential visitors to this site. So I think that's it would be a really great opportunity if we could announce the workshop in some sort of monthly newsletter or communication that you have with the public.
So just spitballing that a little bit, we should have the song is recorded. We should have the song and the video by the end of the month. I mean, that's required under the agreement. I've already got interest from the Eastern Regional Tourism District to receive that to use for promotional stuff. So it occurs to me that maybe using that as the gotcha piece, here's this first little arts piece that we've attached to this site. Help us come up with the next series that makes it more permanent. That's a newsletter story. So maybe we can loosely plan on that.
That sounds good.
Great.
If you can get me what you want promoted, I can probably get it out in the September newsletter.
And when does that go out for September? Early September, right before the end of August, or?
No, it doesn't go out till probably mid-September.
Oh, okay. All right. That's actually even better. That gives us more time to get all the pieces aligned. Perfect.
October is starting the 19th of September and goes to the end of October, October 31st.
Mm-hmm.
So that brochure is at the printers right now. So if anybody has any walks, we can put them online, but it's too late to get them printed.
Okay, that's good to know.
Another element of the economic aspects, that is how this ties into the larger regional network of rail trails. And I have at least 3 contacts, 2 with the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and they have already indicated that they want to make this a complementary link to the East Coast Greenway. And so we'll be able to use all of their marketing aspects. And another is a man who lives up in Northampton, Massachusetts, who is a real dynamo. He knows all sorts of people and all sorts of avenues for funding. And I've communicated with him and have his enthusiastic interests. So that ties in both with the how we can see some economic gain to the town of Thompson as a result of more people coming through the area.
Seems like
So I guess I would propose that if we are going to continue to have these monthly meetings, maybe we should have an outline of a workshop for the next one. And that doesn't have to be full content or anything, just like how do we want it to look?
I'm going to propose that Paul, Charlie, the Historical Society, tell Tom Chase, if they can do their own personal wish list of what they want on the site, and I can compile that and give it to you. What my question is, if we have the sort of the questions we want to ask the public, who's going to make this workshop? Like, who's going to put, like what CME did for the wayfinding, who's going to put this together?
the Park Service can help with that.
Okay.
And the wish list would be great. We'd love to see that.
So is that okay, Charlie, Paul? I mean, we've talked about this. You have stuff in your heads, and you say you've got a documentation from what we've done already. If you can go back to that and then put this wish list together, and either to me or to Tira, but we'll consolidate it. Does that sound?
Yes, I'll work on that. I don't know how easily Paul and I will be able to actually get together, I suppose.
No, that's why I'm saying do it individually. You may duplicate
Okay.
each other, but then we won't miss anything.
Okay.
Great.
Cool.
What's a good timeline for you all for that? Would take you a couple weeks or week or month, or what feels good?
Can we do it by the end of August?
That's you guys. Oh, Charlie, you're on mute.
Oh, I know. It took me 3 times to get to the right point to punch it. Yeah, I believe I can pull up at least what Joe and I had worked on and give it a brush over and see what comes up. I can have that pretty quickly because it's already done.
Okay, and ask Tom Chase if there's additional, you know, you can show him what you have and then see if he wants to add, or just tell him this is what we want from him, his wish list of what he thinks should be at the site, and then we can give those options at the workshop.
Paul, do you want to handle
that's
that?
good, Karen.
No, I think what Karen's saying is correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Karen said we should send her all our wish lists and she'll compile that. Is that what I heard, Karen?
Well, why don't you CC me and Tira?
Okay. So Charlie, just send them to Karen and Tara and they'll compile it.
But you want to touch base with Tom and make sure that that your wish list doesn't miss anything that he knows about?
Well, they can overlap or whatever. Yeah, we'll get Tom's input also.
Good.
Great. So good. So you'll submit those to Karen at the end of the month. And then this list about all the things we want to think about for the workshop, and we can come up with an outline. And then also in terms of roles, if anyone would be available to give maybe like a short synopsis of the train wreck, or maybe just talk a little bit about the town for our to kind of just a quick flavor of that history looks, give our audience an idea. Maybe someone could think about presenting, and maybe several people in a few different workshops. So that's something to consider too. But if you're interested, yeah, please let us know, and we could fold you into the outline of the workshop. Maybe we can talk about that the next meeting. And then,
sorry, Steph, you were breaking up a little, but Joe, who presented at the site? Was it you?
Yes, we have 3 different presentations. We have a 15-minute one, we have a 45-minute one, and we have an hour-and-a-half one. So we can do any one of the 3 that we have already existing.
great.
I've given 2 of them to answer you specifically. Tom Chase has given the hour-and-a-half one.
I think it would have to be a shorter one for our audience, but if that's already put together, that makes it even easier.
You tell us how long or short you want it, and we can edit to suit.
Great.
Yeah, 15 minutes is probably a good benchmark, Joe, maybe even a little shorter depending on how much other material we end up developing for the workshop.
Not a problem. We can cut it to 10 minutes if you want.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to figure if one of the goals that we're stating here is not just to reach our own residents, although we certainly do want to reach our own residents, the further away you get from where people might have encountered it casually by living here, the less likely that is. So,
I might also suggest pulling in someone from the Connecticut Trail Census to present on the data they collected. And maybe we could also find someone that would also be willing to present about the survey information that you all collected. Unless one of you feels comfortable talking about that. But if we do have someone from the Trail Census or an outside organization present, that's just a way to pull them in as well. So that could be something we think about too.
Charlie Tracy from Pomfret is involved with the Trail Census, right?
That's correct. I'll include him in the communication that I'm sending out.
He's retiring, sadly.
He is.
He is. He's retiring on Thursday.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, so he should have all the time in the world now.
That's true.
Yeah. Hey, listen, if he can't make it, he'll know who will. I've got a few other names over there.
Well, you still got a time until Thursday. Maybe we can get him.
I'm going to, until Thursday? You mean not this Thursday?
All right, so where are we at here, guys?
I think we can wrap up with some next steps going forward. I'll turn it to Elizabeth.
So we're thinking at this point, in terms of, people taking on tasks to complete and be working on in between each of our meetings, that perhaps a monthly schedule might work nicely. And so we don't have a current date set right now, but how does a Tuesday and that 7 p.m. time, and how does all of that feel to you folks? This can change if we think a different time is better for everyone.
Can I suggest that you guys doodle poll it again? I find those super helpful. Also, I don't know about anybody else, but my schedule, particularly in the month of September, is insane.
It's a busy month.
And I just scheduled, as Joey Martino can tell you, I just scheduled weekly meetings for myself from starting next week through the end of the year to work on the POCD, and that's jammed in with all of my other monthly meetings and my sports commitments. So it's breathing room for me is difficult. Not that I have to be at every meeting, but I
you're our
certainly
fearless
want to be there.
leader.
Yeah.
I am nobody's leader. I'm just the loudest person in the room.
Okay. That sounds good. We will send a poll out. Obviously, yes. Availability certainly fluctuates by month. So that sounds good. And so Steph alluded to this earlier, and hopefully that I am referencing the correct thing by mentioning this, is that Steph, Tira, and I have been meeting on sort of a bi-weekly basis, just hearing about updates concerning Thompson and our work together. And so again, we don't have a set date for these, but they happen about twice a month. And we do imagine that a lot of what our upcoming conversations will encompass are this workshop exactly. So we just want to invite everyone here to be a part of those. It's not an obligation, but all are welcome if you want to jump in. We just have a conference call. All are about and less than an hour, just to chat. So if you want to tune in, we can sort of send out the bigger alert to folks about when those are happening and what times, things of that nature. But again, optional. So, but we'd love to have you. And then, like we just talked about before, we, after hearing about your wish list and sort of thinking about methods for how to best gather input from the community and our workshop attendees, Steph and I will work on putting together an outline for us to work on and refine and discuss as a group at our next meeting, which, like I said, we'll imagine will be sometime in September, depending on when we're available. How does all of that sound to folks? Any questions or?
I'm just wondering if the bi-weekly phone calls end up replacing the monthly meeting. I mean, how do we get everything?
Well, they do tend to happen during office hours.
Yeah.
So that might be less availability for the larger group.
And they're more planning for meetings like this. So we would probably go over the outline together and try and make sense of all these ideas that came in today, and really work through an agenda for the next monthly meeting. So it's like kind of planning for the planning meeting, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, you can let people know when you're going to have that call and how to get on it.
Sure.
Okay.
No problem.
Quick question about upcoming meetings and events. This doodle poll thing that we're going to have, that's for the next planning meeting, or is it for when we're going to try to do the workshop?
The next thing like this, Charlie.
Yes, it's going to be for our monthly working group.
Okay, I'm going to be sending out an email, and I'm including Stephanie and Elizabeth, who I believe will be the point 2 person for that doodle thing. And I'm going to invite people to reach back to you and say, put me on that list so I know about it. These are the regional ones, the East Coast Greenway specifically, and they are as well a reminder of some of the local people.
Great. Thank you.
Well, Charlie, do we have you're thinking you're going to bring a bunch of other people into this. We're going to have to recap for them where we've been. You want to do that ahead of time?
I can, yes, but I'm not seeing a bunch of people, at the most 1 or 2 additional, but they're going to be key people that we're going to really want to pull back on what their information, their background, and their experience can help us with.
Okay.
If somebody really wants to get caught up, Karen, too, Steph and Elizabeth have been keeping rolling notes on those calls. So I can probably download that and forward it as a PDF or a Word doc, just for somebody who wants to get caught up on what we've been talking about.
Is this being recorded too? Because is there some place to view that or no?
Hi, John. I have been recording it, yes. So when I get the Zoom link sent to my email tomorrow, I can distribute it to the group, and I will upload it. Hopefully I'll be able to do it tomorrow to the town's YouTube channel as well, because there's cloud storage issues. I try to get them transferred over to YouTube as quickly as I can.
So they could watch this too to review what we've talked about too, I would think.
Yep.
And we'll have these notes put together as well.
For whatever it's worth, and it's slightly off topic on the agenda, I am back in conversation with ERTD about those fold-down map brochures. It keeps stalling and spitting forward and stalling and spitting forward. But I think Wyndham is coming on board. Theoretically, Pomfret is still on board. Thompson has a reduced amount probably that can come out of EDC, but there is still money that I can juggle around in there. And probably Colchester. So that's 5 of the 7 Eastern region towns who can pool some funds. There's that matching program that ERTD was talking about launching is live now. So if we can pull something intelligible together with Jeannie's help at Airline Trail, it is possible that we'll have that those fold down double-sided Airline Trail maps, you know, featuring the full trail on one side, the individual towns on the other, sometime in this season, which would be really cool if we can get that organized to move forward.
Great. Do you know what was the price of per piece? Do you remember?
I've got it at the office. I don't have it here.
Okay.
They were surprisingly reasonable for such a sort of nice, durable piece. I do remember that. So that ERTD match, that would be up to $25,000. So if each of the 7 towns in the Eastern region came up with $3,000, that's 21, and then you add 25 to it. That's $46,000 for brochures, design, printing, and distribution. I think you can get a pretty high quality product out of that. That's if it all works out. I've got a good pitch. It's just a matter of getting all the pieces sort of pointing in the same direction.
Okay, anything else on the agenda?
That's all we got for you.
Yeah, that about does it. And certainly we don't want to take up your entire evening. So obviously in the meantime, don't hesitate to ask us questions, reach out, join in our bi-weekly calls. We're always around, you know where to find us. Anything else, Steph?
I don't think so, unless there's any questions or comments.
Let's design a park.
Yay.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Good meeting,
stay
everybody.
safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.